Go ahead and start recording. So we talked a little bit about your quiz from yesterday, and we're talking about hellbenders and oxygen being an abiotic factor. Hellbenders can't tolerate low oxygen levels. Actually, I guess their graphic would look more like, I don't know that there's any level of oxygen that's too much. I think having like super high oxygen levels, as high as water can go, wouldn't be a problem. But the minute those oxygen levels start to drop in water, the hellbenders die out. They can't make it. So, anybody here have a fish tank at home? No one? You have a fish tank? Okay. Do you have a bubbler in it? A bubbler? Does something make bubbles? Why? Why do you have a bubbler? Well, why do you think you might have a bubbler? So you can get oxygen into the water, exactly. So you're circulating oxygen through the water. The same thing happens in a creek when the creek goes over rocks and you see all kinds of foam and bubbles. That's helping to oxygenate the water. How do oxygen levels in a body of water drop? Okay, so stagnant water would tend to have lower oxygen levels. Here's a big part of it. Poop. Fecal material. You can call it whatever else you want to. Poop. So when you have poop, or really any source of nutrients, because that's all poop is, in the water, it's great fertilizer. Anybody here put manure on their garden? Or ever seen people put manure on their garden? Well-rotted manure. Rabbits are great. Rabbit manure is fantastic. Cow manure is good. Horse manure is great. It's good fertilizer. Poop is a good fertilizer. Well, when poop gets into the water, it fertilizes all right. And when you have fecal material in water, there's a big cloud of nastiness. It's good fertilizer. But you know what it fertilizes? Algae. So you get an algae bloom, and if you've ever had a fish tank sort of go bad, my husband has a fish tank in the bottom. I don't know if there's anything living in it still. He hasn't touched it in a year, and all the sides are completely green. I call it the algae tank. Like, we don't know if there's anything alive in there. It's disgusting. He just kind of quit doing anything with it, and I'm not in charge of the fish tank. So we get this huge bloom of beautiful green algae. Well, those algae die, and when they die, bacteria break them down, they decompose them, and to do that, the bacteria use, guess what? Oxygen. And they suck all the oxygen right out of the water. There's an entire, do you know where the Gulf of Mexico is? It's near Mexico, yes. So there's the coast of Mexico, there's Texas, there's the boot of Louisiana, there's Florida, okay? How's that? Yep, right there. How's that for a bad drawing? Here's the Gulf of Mexico. And here, we'll draw it in blue, is the Mississippi River. If you go outside and you go down the hill and you spit into Beaver Creek, guess where that spit's going to end up?
In the Ohio.
In the Ohio, and then in the Mississippi, and then in the Gulf of Mexico. So likewise, if you have a little stream and you put a bunch of cows in the creek and let them poop in the creek, guess where that poop ends up? Gulf of Mexico. If you have a septic system that's failing to a ditch, when I was a watershed coordinator, we used to call certain streams brown trout streams. It means poop. There are still places in Ohio with what are called straight pipe septic systems. When you flush the toilet, whatever's in it just goes out to the creek. It's a straight pipe system.
I was watching the Mythbusters yesterday, the day before. So
Okay.
they're trying to make a rocket fly out of the poop.
Okay. Okay. When you have fecal material in water, it causes algae blooms. The Gulf of Mexico used to be a tremendously rich ecosystem. There's an entire area here in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico that's called the dead zone. Guess what lives in the dead zone? Not much. Yeah, algae and slime, basically. Because the Mississippi River drains the entire eastern half of the U.S., and between failing septic systems and cows pooping in water and other kinds of nutrient runoff and even excess fertilizer on lawns, all those nutrients wash downstream and end up here in the Gulf of Mexico. And there is this huge zone with almost no oxygen in the water. Fish can't live there. So oxygen's an abiotic factor. It's really important in aquatic ecosystems, but something we hadn't mentioned yesterday and I wanted to talk about a little bit. Okay, so of hellbenders and tolerance curves and oxygen in water, your last question was, okay, so we covered that. So let's go ahead, we're going to move on to this. So organisms can do one of two things if they're outside their comfort zone. And I'm going to draw one more tolerance curve just because I like them. No. So when an organism finds itself in a place where it's not in its green zone, it's outside of its green zone. Doesn't have enough water, it's too cold, it's too hot, the pH of the soil around it is not good, there's not enough oxygen in the water that it's living in. It's got two choices. It can change the body. Its body can change to get it into a position where it's in its green zone. Or it can just let its body drift with whatever the conditions around it are. So we talk about these as regulators and conformers. And it gets too cold. And you're a regulator. You are a mammal. Some fine mammals such as yourselves. You're a mammal. If you get too cold, what starts to happen? You shiver. What else? Well, if your body temperature starts to drop, you shiver, you get goosebumps.
You start to burn like excess water.
Okay, your body will start to burn fat. It's like throwing more wood on the wood stove. Because your body is regulating its conditions to stay in the green zone. Your body has ways of keeping you in the green zone for temperature. It does for water loss too. Remember, this is all about maintaining stable internal conditions. What do we call that concept? Homeostasis. Your body wants to keep itself in the green zone, maintain homeostasis in that green zone, in your thriving area. And to do that, it will burn fat, it will shiver, it will get goosebumps. If you're hot, you'll perspire. You'll flush. Your fingers and toes will get a lot of blood flow in them and swell up because they're nice radiators. That's why that happens. Same thing is true of cats and dogs, all kinds of mammals. Birds maintain stable internal conditions. They're regulators. The other option is that in some species, their body reflects just what the conditions around them are. They're conformers. They conform to the temperature around them. Snakes can't get warm by themselves. Does anybody here have a snake at home? I should have a snake too. Geez, I need a whole menagerie here. Could get some lizards. It'd be pretty cool. What do snakes do to get warm? They'll go sit out in the sun. Very often on a summer morning, you'll find snakes laying out along the road because the road has heat on it, like by noon or so. The road has absorbed heat. It's a good heat sink, and snakes will crawl out and lay on the road. A lot of snakes get hit that way because they can absorb that heat from the road surface. Fish can't regulate their own temperature. Snakes can't regulate their own temperature. Turtles, frogs. So what do they do to stay in the green zone? They have to move it along. If you're not warm enough here, buddy, you better keep moving, or you die. There's a huge evolutionary advantage to being able to regulate your own internal conditions to being a regulator. There's cost, too. It costs calories. It costs energy. But if you're a conformer, you have to go where the conditions work for you. Or you have to do something like becoming dormant. Snakes, I love snakes. I think snakes are awesome. I've always liked snakes. As a kid, I used to find garter snakes and, take them home, and I had a tank out in the garage. I was allowed to keep them for a week or so before I had to let them go. You don't like snakes? Not a big fan. Okay. No snake lovers in here? Okay. I'm going to say, usually I have at least a few people who are like, yeah, snakes are cool. That's how you learn about getting musked. Have you been musked by a garter snake? No? Oh, then you haven't handled enough garter snakes. You have homework this spring. Handling a garter snake and suddenly your hands are all stinky and slimy. It's because they musk. They shoot this smelly, oily liquid out of their anal glands. It's a defense mechanism. So if you were a predator and you had that snake in your mouth, when it did that, you would probably go, since you don't have it in your mouth, I don't think. I don't know what you do. You're just like, that's weird. My hands stink. Well, it's not harmful, but anyway, snakes in the winter around here, what are the snakes doing right now? They're in the ground. How are they in the ground? All by their little old selves? They will find burrows, and what you'll find is what's colloquially called a snake ball. You'll have lots of different species that find a collective burrow, and they all head in there. You'll have lots of individuals. You will have mixed species, and they'll stay there over the winter. And the body heat that they do generate, they get real inactive. They get real sluggish, but they still generate some heat just from normal body processes, and the whole bunch of them in a sheltered place underground keeps them alive through the winter, because underground is a fairly consistent temperature. They conform to the temperature around them. So the big deal is you want to stay in your green zone. And to do that, you can either burn calories and change conditions, or you can go where conditions are favorable or stop being active when they're not. So that's the next point here, is that you can also do this. You can go dormant. You can migrate. You can escape from conditions that make your survival tough. You can escape from conditions that make survival difficult. So that's what snakes are doing. It's too cold. I can't regulate my own body temperature. I'm crawling into an underground burrow, and I'm going to stay there until it warms up. Darn it. I wish I could do that. I would love to be in a burrow right now. Groundhogs do this. Bears do this. Black bears give birth while they're dormant, while they're hibernating. Mama black bears crawl into their dens pregnant, and while they are hibernating, they give birth. And the babies crawl up, find a nipple, and nurse through the rest of the winter. And when mama wakes up, she's real skinny because she's been expending calories all winter making food for the baby, nursing, and she hasn't been taking any in. So it's really important for mama black bears to get good and fat before they go into hibernation. They need a lot of body fat so that they can burn it all winter when they're dormant. Groundhogs do the same thing. You see a fat groundhog in September, you can bet it'll be a skinny groundhog in March. They're subsisting on stored energy. They've gone dormant. You know, for groundhogs, they can regulate their own body temperature, but they can't get enough calories through the winter to keep the fires going, in essence. There's not enough fuel for them. So they have to go dormant. Migration is the other option. And that, you know, you can leave where conditions are not favorable. Birds do it. Why do I have a picture of a butterfly up there? Because some species of butterflies migrate, and specifically the monarch butterflies. So when you see a monarch butterfly here in the summer, and we typically see them in later summer, we don't see them a lot real early, like August and September, that butterfly, the last butterflies of the fall, will fly all the way from here to Mexico. Little teeny butterflies make that trip. And then they will lay eggs and die, and the ones that hatch out in the spring will fly back north. So yeah, you can go dormant, you can migrate, because if you can't stay in your green zone, maybe it's best to just go to sleep. You know, if you can't stay with either calorie intake or temperature or whatever else, can't stay green, sleep. Bats do this too. Bats go into dormancy. And some bat species actually migrate. There are a few bat species that do migrate. But most bats around here just go dormant. They go into caves, they go into old barns. Has anybody ever been to the bat barn at Tidioute? Did you know that there was a bat barn? Anybody here ever been up into the Allegheny Mountains? Allegheny National Forest? Oil City? Tionesta? No? Okay. And there's a Boy Scout camp somewhere up there, so I know sometimes I have students who say, oh yeah, we did blah, 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 blah. Okay. So yeah, if you can't stay in that green zone, if you can't stay in your thriving zone, you can always go someplace where you can, or you can go dormant. And then you don't need as many calories. And so you kind of change the rules of the game. So a niche is a species' way of life. And it includes the range of temperatures it can survive, how much water it needs, the type of food it can eat, or the amount of sunlight that it requires to make its own food, what eats it, what it eats, when it reproduces, how it reproduces. Does it reproduce sexually or asexually? Is there an actual sex act if it's sexual reproduction? Or is it like fish where she lays down the eggs, he lays down the sperm, they never even see one another? How many offspring does it usually have? Is this something that only has one or two offspring, like a bear, and takes really good care of them? Or something like an insect that has thousands of offspring at a time and doesn't do anything to help them out? What time of day is it active? I have my little daily deer count, because it's sort of twilight when I'm coming in the morning, and today my count was 5. 5 deer crossed my path. All of this stuff and more is that species' niche. You can kind of think of it as its job description. Okay. A niche is kind of like its job description. It is different than habitat. I'll shut up and let you go. So the first thing that you're going to do, remember when you picked a species and you created a document with your name and the species name? The first thing you're going to do is some research on your species niche. And so niche is, like I said, it's literally everything about how a species lives. So let's take the white-tailed deer, for example. Who in here had white-tailed deer? Did I have some deer? Okay, even better. Did you have deer? So if we think about white-tailed deer, can white-tailed deer survive when it's 95 degrees out or 100 degrees out? Do white-tailed deer live in Ohio in the summer? Is the sky blue? Okay. I was making sure that you were all alive. I didn't know if I needed to call the nurse or if people had pulses or not. I was kind of concerned there. Do white-tailed deer live in Ohio in the summer? Yeah. They don't migrate elsewhere in the summer. They stay here all summer. Can white-tailed deer survive when it's 10 below zero?
Yes.
Yeah. They've got a really wide range of temperatures that they can survive in. So the range of temperature that they can survive is part of their niche. How much water do they need? I don't know an answer to that off the top of my head. Somebody does, I'm sure. Huh? They you'll very often see them in water, crossing water, drinking out of streams. They like to have a water source nearby. I mean, they probably have water needs just about like any other mammal. You or me or a cat or a dog. You know, they need access to water. What do they eat, or can they make food out of sunlight? What do deer eat? Plants, grasses, shrubs, baby trees, pretty much any kind of plant matter they can get their hands on. They can't make food out of sunlight. What eats a deer? Huh? Wolves, though we don't have any wolves in the wild in Ohio. But yeah, wolves were a historic predator of deer. What else eats deer? People, coyotes. Coyotes will especially prey on baby deer. And the eastern coyote is starting to, there are reports of eastern coyotes hunting in groups and taking down adult deer. We'll talk more about the eastern coyote and how interesting they are a little bit later. So really, a lot of things will eat deer. Baby deer are prey for black bears in places where their ranges overlap. We don't have a stable black bear population in Columbiana County, but we do get occasional black bears who wander in. If you head over the PA line, you'll start to get into areas where there are stable, normal black bear populations. So black bear are a predator of deer, not adult deer, because a deer can outrun a black bear in a heartbeat, but of baby deer, because they're vulnerable. What organisms it eats? We said plants. Deer are not predators except on clover. When do deer reproduce? Do you know? No. No. They have a very specified range of reproduction. So deer reproduce once a year. They only have babies once a year. Have you heard the term the rut? It's when all the male deer and all the female deer are suddenly very interested in sexual reproduction. Things get a little bit crazy out there. Ooh. When do they reproduce? When do they mate? How long does a female deer have? How long does she carry her offspring? How long does she gestate? Does she typically have one baby? Does she typically have a litter? In some species, like in goats, twins are actually the most common. So the most common reproductive number in goats is 2. Goats very often have litters of 2. So they very often have twins. Sheep also. How it reproduces, sexually or asexually. Do deer reproduce sexually? Yes, they do. How many offspring do they usually have? What time of day are deer active? When?
Early morning and sometimes in the afternoon.
Okay. So you're familiar with the term nocturnal? What does nocturnal mean? It means night active. Active in the dark. Mice are nocturnal for the most part. Owls are nocturnal. Diurnal is the opposite of nocturnal. What does diurnal mean then? Active during the day. Humans are primarily diurnal. We are primarily day active, with some exceptions, and we modify our behavior. Like there are some people who work night shift. They're nocturnal, not by choice, but they have to be to make a living. There's one more category. This is a great word. So we have, nocturnal, diurnal, and we have, this is fun to say, crepuscular. Like creep, and pus would be in a zit or an infected cut. Killer. Crepuscular. Love that word. Deer, and you two nailed it, are crepuscular. It means they are dawn and dusk active. Now deer are actually, more research has found that deer are actually active for the whole 24 hours. But most of their activity occurs in the dawn hours and at the dusk hours. Those times of changing light. There's a reason for that. It's harder to see stuff at dawn and dusk. The changing light plays tricks with the eye. And so that's the hardest time of day to see things. If you want to avoid predators, you want to be out when it's really hard to get a grip on what you're seeing. That's the best time of day to be out if you want to not be eaten by something. Okay, so what you're going to do, and I will end up giving you some time tomorrow. When you walk in tomorrow, there is going to be a format document linked on Classroom. You will get that, you will copy that information to your form, and you will do some research. And you'll start to fill in blanks about your species' niche. Okay, make sense? Sound reasonable? Okay, and we'll probably do a recall quiz about niches also tomorrow when you walk in. So what I want you to do is look over your notes from today. Look over what we talked about with niche. I can tell that all of you wrote down lots and lots of stuff that we were discussing. Look it over tomorrow before you come in, because we'll have a recall quiz. Have a good day, folks.